escapees who had made it to the north. Many spoke of a place in South Carolina rumored to be a safe haven, Angel's Rest, they called it. The details varied, but the stories often included mention of a chapel in the woods, kind people, offering shelter, and then nothing, no further contact, no trace of the others who had gone there. Morrison traced these stories back to the Charleston region. He posed as a trader, quietly gathering information, building trust among the enslaved and free black communities. In time, he heard of the Whitworth family and their unusual plantation chapel. Rumors swirled about their wealth, their influence, their seemingly boundless generosity toward neighboring plantations. But others hinted at disappearances, whispered warnings not to believe everything said about Angel's Rest. It was a chance encounter with a young enslaved boy named Josiah that finally pointed Morrison directly toward Seraphim's Grace. The boy, who had recently escaped a nearby plantation, said his sister had fled months earlier. Guided by talk of a sanctuary chapel, she had never been heard from again. Her name, Ruthie, appeared in no official record except, years later, it would be found carefully entered in Gabriel Whitworth's ledgers. Morrison visited the plantation under the guise of a trade negotiation. He was shown the chapel, the fields, and the main house. Gabriel Whitworth greeted him personally, warm, charismatic, perfectly at ease. Miriam offered tea. Lilith smiled politely. Morrison saw nothing that could be called evidence, but everything felt wrong. The plantation was too quiet, the workers too guarded, the family too polished. And when he asked to see the chapel's basement, Gabriel laughed and deflected, saying it was under repair from storm damage. That night, Morrison wrote everything he had observed into a journal and left Charleston under cover of darkness. He returned to Philadelphia, convinced he had stumbled upon something horrific, something bigger than he had anticipated, but without solid proof. He knew the abolitionists would need more than stories. So he returned, this time with a small team of investigators posing as religious revivalists. Their goal, gather evidence from inside the chapel and expose the society behind it. But the Whitworths were already suspicious. One of the new rivals, Abel Whitworth believed, was asking too many questions. It was Lilith who confirmed the deception. Her sharp intuition picked up on the unnatural way one of the supposed revivalists avoided eye contact with Gabriel. That night, the visitor disappeared. His body was later found near the swamp, marked in a way Sharif recognized as a warning from another society member. The investigation stalled. Morrison and his team were forced to retreat, but not before stealing several pages from the chapel's records. These documents, though partial, confirmed the existence of the Southern Redemption Society and hinted at its reach. Back in Philadelphia, Morrison presented the findings to the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, who in turn contacted federal authorities. But political tensions and the fear of scandal kept most officials from acting. It wasn't until 1802 that a federal investigator was dispatched under direct order from President Jefferson. Disguised as a census taker, he visited Seraphim's Grace. He documented every structure, every name, every odd detail. He saw the modified outbuilding, the unusually fortified chapel, and the lack of older workers among the enslaved population. His report, delivered in secret, recommended immediate action. But before any warrant could be issued, the main house at Seraphim's Grace burned to the ground. Locals claimed lightning had struck during a storm. Others whispered it had been set by the Whitworths themselves. By the time lawmen arrived, the chapel had been dismantled, the outbuildings razed, and the family gone. Some said they escaped to the Caribbean. Others believed they were still operating elsewhere under new names. Gabriel, Miriam, and Lilith were never found. Ezekiel's body was discovered weeks later in a nearby swamp, stabbed multiple times, his mouth sewn shut. Some believed it was the work of a rival society faction. Others thought it was punishment from Gabriel himself for betrayal. Only Michael Whitworth was captured, found weeks later trying to board a ship out of Savannah. He stood trial in 1804, charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder. He maintained his innocence throughout, but left behind a journal that quietly admitted the truth. It detailed names, dates, and chilling procedures. Michael was hanged in 1805. The rest of the family faded into myth. Rumors of sightings continued for decades. A woman matching Miriam's description was reported in Louisiana in 1817. A surgeon in Cuba known only as Dr. Sroff was believed by some to be Sharif Whitworth. The plantation land was eventually sold and broken up. Little remained of the chapel. For years, crops refused to grow on the land where the basement had once been. Locals said the soil was cursed. Others claimed to hear faint cries on quiet nights, carried on the wind through the moss-draped trees. In the early 20th century, a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania stumbled upon Morrison's notes and Michael Whitworth's journal. He published a private monograph on the case, distributing it only to academic colleagues, but word of the Whitworth Chapel murders began circulating in historical circles once again. Today, the story remains mostly hidden, buried beneath decades of silence and fear. But the legacy of the Angel's Rest Chapel still lingers in South Carolina folklore. And every so often, a relic surfaces, a forged death certificate, a preserved body fragment with no clear origin, or a sermon, transcribed in code. And in quiet towns across the South, old churches still display relics with uncertain pasts. Their congregations kneel before them, unaware of the hands that prepared them, or the lives stolen in their making. If this story of faith twisted into something horrific has left you uneasy, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. How many other secrets like this might be buried beneath our history? If you want to explore more hidden chapters of America's past, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and help us keep these lost stories alive. The shadows of history are long, and sometimes they still whisper. Escapees about underground railroad routes, safe houses, and abolitionist contacts. These individuals were never meant to be sold. They were tools for extracting intelligence and then quietly disposed of. Ezekiel treated the entire process like a business, documenting each case with a chilling level of detail and efficiency. Miriam continued to play her familiar role, posing as a benevolent figure within the plantation's chapel. Her ability to gain the trust of new rivals remained unmatched. Lilith, now in her early 20s, had fully taken over Miriam's former duties with younger victims and had become increasingly adept at emotional manipulation. Her soft voice and nurturing demeanor masked the same calculated cruelty that defined the rest of the family. Cain and Abel remained critical to the logistics. Cain oversaw the physical infrastructure of New Seraphim, ensuring everything from cell maintenance to body disposal ran smoothly. Abel expanded the family's intelligence network, building new contacts across the Deep South and carefully analyzing the data they collected. Grace, now older and more reserved after her failed attempt to help Washington, had withdrawn from direct involvement but was closely monitored by the family. Despite their efforts to remain undetected, the events in South Carolina had left a permanent mark. Abolitionist groups across the North now treated any rumors of safe sanctuaries in the Deep South with suspicion. Vigilance among Underground Railroad conductors had increased, and fewer escapees were falling into the traps set by families like the Whitworths. Back in Philadelphia, Washington recovered slowly from his injuries. Though physically weakened, his determination remained strong. His testimony was used in speeches, pamphlets, and newspaper articles, becoming one of the most powerful personal accounts in the abolitionist movement. Jeremiah Morrison returned to his work as well, though he never forgot what he saw beneath Angel's Rest Chapel. In 1806, the federal government quietly opened an investigation into illegal medical specimen trafficking. While no charges were officially filed against the Whitworths, several of their business contacts in the Mid-Atlantic were arrested or fled the country. The trail of evidence stopped short of implicating the family directly, but the pressure was mounting. Over the next decade, New Seraphim operated in a more cautious, fragmented fashion. The once centralized and tightly controlled killing operation became more distributed, relying on affiliated planters and operatives throughout Alabama and Mississippi. Gabriel, aging but still sharp, focused on securing the family's legacy. Through marriage alliances and land acquisitions, his children took on more responsibility, each managing different parts of the network. But the world was changing. By the 1820s, the abolitionist movement had gained significant traction in the North, and tensions between free and slave states were growing. The increased scrutiny made it harder for families like the Whitworths to operate in secret. Their elaborate facade began to crack, and whispers of their true nature resurfaced. In 1832, a fire broke out at New Seraphim, destroying much of the chapel and the underground facility. Officially, it was blamed on a lightning strike during a summer storm, but survivors and abolitionist informants claimed it was no accident, that someone on the inside had finally decided to end the horrors hidden beneath the surface. The Whitworths vanished shortly afterward, their wealth and connections allowing them to disappear without a trace. Some say they fled to Central America or the Caribbean. Others believe they changed names and quietly reintegrated into Southern society. Under new identities, no confirmed sightings of the family were ever reported. Again, today, only fragments of their story remain buried in newspaper clippings, abolitionist records, and sealed court documents. The full scope of their crimes may never be known, but their legacy lives on as a chilling reminder of how easily evil can hide behind the mask of righteousness. If you found this story as disturbing and important as we did, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? Let us know how far these forgotten histories have reached. And stay tuned for more untold stories from America's darker past. And quickly realize just how widespread the conspiracy had become. These weren't fringe figures, they were plantation owners, judges, doctors, and clergy, men of power and influence, all connected by a shared belief that their actions were not only necessary, but righteous. As the conference got underway, Gabriel took the opportunity to reinforce the group's ideology. He spoke with fervor about moral decay in the North, the sanctity of order, and the divine right of slaveholders to cleanse society of those they deemed dangerous. His rhetoric painted murder as salvation and caste torture as discipline. Wrapped in faith, the audience nodded in agreement, many taking notes, others offering donations or pledging new recruits. Meanwhile, Washington and his team quietly documented everything they could. They recorded names, memorized faces, and gathered details of conversations. Their goal wasn't just to witness, it was to build a case that could bring the entire network down. Morrison, still in New Orleans, coordinated the next steps, using coded messages and trusted couriers. He arranged for multiple abolitionist teams to be stationed near key locations throughout the South. The plan was to strike simultaneously, to expose the network, free any remaining captives, and deliver irrefutable evidence to federal officials and northern newspapers. The final stage of the infiltration came when Gabriel invited Washington to a private planning session. There, the society's core members discussed their next phase of expansion, including the establishment of additional false sanctuaries in Mississippi and Louisiana. Gabriel spoke of the financial potential, but others in the room were more focused on the ideological mission. They believed they were shaping a new moral order, one where mercy had no place, and control was maintained through fear, not compassion. Washington knew it was time. He signaled his team, and within hours, the coordinated effort began. Abolitionist groups struck multiple sites at once, freeing captives, seizing documents, and forcing the hands of complacent authorities. At New Seraphim, the confrontation turned violent. Gabriel's guards discovered Washington's true identity, and chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the plantation grounds as Washington and two of his companions tried to protect the evidence they had gathered. Several society members escaped, but many were captured, and for the first time, the Southern Redemption Society faced public scrutiny. The documents seized from New Seraphim included ledgers, letters, and personal journals, material that confirmed everything Washington and Morrison had warned about. Most damning were records of payments from medical schools and correspondence outlining the recruitment of new partners. This was no longer just rumor or isolated abuse, it was a well-organized, multi-state enterprise built on deception, torture, and murder. News of the raids spread quickly. Northern newspapers published detailed exposes, complete with first-hand accounts from rescued prisoners. Public outrage surged, and pressure mounted on federal and territorial officials to act. Some arrests were made, A few trials took place, but true justice remained elusive. Gabriel Whitworth disappeared before he could be brought to trial. So did several key members of the society. It's believed that with help from political allies, they fled west or left the country altogether. Their plantation was seized and later burned to the ground officially by accident, though many believe it was done intentionally to erase the horrors it once concealed. Washington returned to the North hailed as a hero, though the cost of his courage was steep. The trauma of his experience is never fully left him, but his testimony became a cornerstone of abolitionist literature. Morrison continued his work as well, turning the society's exposure into a broader campaign against medical exploitation and slavery-driven profiteering. The Southern Redemption Society never recovered from the Alabama raid. While remnants of the network likely persisted in secret, their power was broken, their reputation irreparably damaged. Today, the story of Gabriel Whitworth and his false sanctuaries remains largely forgotten, buried beneath layers of sanitized history. But the records still exist, the names are still known, and the legacy of those who fought to expose the truth continues in the quiet determination of those who refuse to let injustice go unanswered. If you found this story important or eye-opening, let us know in the comments and consider subscribing. For more hidden chapters of history. Collapse had been genuine, the result of years of trauma and guilt. Others suspected it was an act, just another way for a Whitworth to avoid accountability. The fallout from the raid on New Seraphim Plantation sent shockwaves through both the North and South. For abolitionists, it confirmed their worst fears about the hidden cruelties behind slavery's facade. For many in the South, however, the exposure of the Southern Redemption Society was met with defensiveness and denial. Some viewed the investigation as an attack on Southern honor and values, further deepening the divide between regions. In the years that followed, the materials gathered during the raid were used by abolitionist writers and speakers to educate the public about the systemic brutality that had gone largely unnoticed. The detailed records, particularly Gabriel's journal and Seraph's laboratory notes, were cited in pamphlets and speeches as irrefutable evidence of the moral corruption embedded in the institution of slavery. Yet, despite this documentation, true justice remained elusive. Many of the victims were never identified, and the full extent of the network's reach was never completely mapped. The Southern Redemption Society faded from public discourse, gradually replaced by larger events and growing national conflicts. Still, the story of New Seraphim Plantation lingered in the shadows, a grim reminder of how ideology, profit, and unchecked power can twist human behavior. It showed how even ordinary individuals, protected by wealth and status, could participate in unthinkable crimes, and how those crimes could continue when society chooses to look away. Gabriel Whitworth's legacy, once buried beneath layers of theology and economic justification, became a warning to future generations, not just about slavery, but about the dangers of rationalizing cruelty in the name of faith, order, or progress. If you found this story meaningful, consider subscribing to learn more about the forgotten histories that still shape the world we live in today. Whether Constance Whitworth's condition was real or staged, we may never truly know. What is certain is that she took crucial knowledge about the origins of her family's crimes to the grave. The unmasking of the Whitworth network had a profound impact on the Underground Railroad. Gabriel's carefully collected intelligence exposed long-standing escape routes, safe houses, and allies within the movement. As a result, abolitionists were forced to dismantle familiar paths and rework their strategies entirely. Conductors once trusted found themselves followed or compromised, their names discovered in the records left behind. Still, this exposure did more than disrupt escape operations. It energized the abolitionist cause in the North. Morrison's reports, widely published in newspapers, gave many Americans their first detailed look at the brutality used to uphold slavery. The idea that these crimes had been carried out under a religious banner stunned the public and shifted the conversation from economics to morality. Samuel Washington, once a victim of the Whitworths, became a powerful voice in the movement. His first-hand accounts of torture resonated with church audiences, particularly those unsettled by the misuse of Christian doctrine to justify violence. Through his efforts, many came to see opposition to slavery not just as a political issue, but a moral and religious duty. Jeremiah Morrison, too, continued his investigations. He uncovered similar operations in states like Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. His work helped shape modern investigative techniques, but it came at a cost. He died in 1825, reportedly tormented by nightmares of what he'd uncovered. New Seraphim Plantation, the center of the Alabama operation, was left to decay after Gabriel's execution. Locals claimed the land was cursed. The chapel burned in 1815, though the underground chambers remained intact. The main house stood empty until a storm finally brought it down in 1847, leaving only its foundation as a silent reminder of the past. Historians estimate that the Whitworth family and their associates were responsible for at least 1,800 deaths between 1789 and 1808. This includes both victims killed directly and those captured and executed based on intelligence gathered through torture. The actual number may be much higher, as many records were destroyed before authorities could examine them. The Whitworth case stands as one of the earliest recorded examples of systematic murder disguised as religious service in American history. Gabriel's misuse of Christian teachings to justify his actions would later echo in the tactics of other extremist groups. His ability to present himself as a pious leader while overseeing mass killings demonstrated the dangerous power of corrupted religious authority. The operation's medical component also exposed troubling links between respected institutions and criminal activity. Some of the country's top medical schools knowingly accepted or at least failed to question the source of the bodies they received. The scandal led to the creation of ethical standards in anatomical research, though these would take years to be fully enforced. The Whitworths also pioneered methods that would later define organized crime. Gabriel's meticulous documentation tracking victims, profits, and escape routes offered a blueprint for how to run a large, secretive criminal network. His records helped law enforcement understand the structure and coordination required to sustain such an operation across multiple states. But the case also showed how weak early American justice could be when confronted with crimes that crossed regional lines. Despite overwhelming evidence, many Whitworth associates escaped punishment due to legal technicalities, threats, or political interference. Their ability to avoid accountability revealed the deep cracks in the country's legal framework, and the political protection often extended to those upholding slavery. Even more disturbing was how widely supported the Whitworths were by people. Seen as respectable, planters, politicians, and clergy backed them either actively or by turning a blind eye. It wasn't just individual corruption, it was a society that had accepted dehumanization as normal and at times even moral. We may never know the full extent of what the Whitworths did. Some records were destroyed. Others remain sealed in archives few have explored. Local folklore in Alabama still tells of mysterious deaths and vanishings that match the family's timeline, suggesting their known crimes may be only part of the story. Modern attempts to study the site have run into resistance, but surveys conducted in the 1990s using ground-penetrating radar uncovered underground structures that align with descriptions of the torture chambers. Much of the evidence still exists, buried under decades of dirt and vegetation. There's also growing evidence that the family, or those using their aliases, continued criminal activity. Long after Alabama, documents from Texas, Mexico, and even parts of South America reference individuals linked to their operations. Passenger lists, medical school records, and government reports point to the same patterns of exploitation and concealment. What's most unsettling is the possibility that the Whitworths weren't alone. Their methodical approach, their use of religion and respectability as cover, and their network of high-level supporters suggest there could have been other families or groups doing the same operating undetected in other corners of the South. Records of unexplained deaths and questionable religious sects hint that their model may not have been unique. Ultimately, the story of the Whitworth family is one of the darkest episodes in American religious history. Their calculated use of theology, To rationalize violence shows how dangerous unchecked authority can be, especially when cloaked in moral language. Their crimes not only devastated their immediate victims, but had ripple effects far beyond. Intelligence they gathered led to countless other captures and deaths. Their influence corrupted parts of the medical world and taught future criminals how to build large-scale, profitable, and concealed operations. Worst of all, their success in avoiding full punishment showed how effective political protection and social status could be in shielding evil from justice. Today, the New Seraphim plantation site is largely forgotten. There's no marker, no monument, no memorial to the hundreds who died there or to those who risked their lives to stop it. Its silence speaks volumes about how often the darkest parts of history are pushed aside. But remembering this story matters. It's a warning about what happens when ideology, power, and profit override humanity. Gabriel and his followers believed they were doing good. That belief made them more dangerous, not less. Studying their crimes isn't just about the past. It's about recognizing the signs of similar systems, ones that justify cruelty in the name of order, profit, or even faith, and making sure we don't let them flourish again. The question isn't whether the Whitworths were real. The evidence speaks for itself. The real question is how many more like them exist today and how much of that history remains hidden. Their story is a reminder of both humanity's capacity for cruelty and the courage it takes to confront it. The abolitionists who fought them, often at great personal risk, showed that even in the face of systemic evil, individuals can make a difference. The bells of New Seraphim have long since gone silent, but what they represent still echoes. If we're to truly face our past and prevent such horrors from returning, we must continue asking the hard questions, even when the answers are buried deep. What do you think is more unsettling, that this operation existed under the mask of religion, or that so much of it may still be buried in untouched records? Let us know in the comments. And if this part of history gave you something to think about, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Some truths are hard to hear, but they're even harder to forget.